an introduction to frameworks, systems, and relationships. This weekly unit will cover the following objectives. You'll have an introduction to the course and provide it with basic information about Social Work 654. We'll have a brief introduction into systems, how systems are organized, what makes up systems, and its various components. And then we'll talk about the relationships between those components, relationships within systems, and relationships outside of systems. And since this is a course on policy analysis, we'll talk about the basics of social policy analysis to get you thinking about the various approaches and methods that you may want to take to analyze in a particular policy. And then we'll end with the relevance of this particular course to the career that you have chosen. So let's get started. There's a few things we're going to want to do before we get going, and that includes some information about an expectation that I have around introductions for you, information about the best way to contact me, information about the course, what I expect of you as an individual, and the various assignments that make up the most of the scoring within the course itself. So let's have some fun with introductions. What I'd like you to do is go to Glockster.com, and if you don't already have an account, create one. It's free and it's real basic. Then I'd like you to create a one-page introduction of yourself. You can include text, pictures, video, whatever you think is appropriate. Just try to express yourself as an individual so that I, as your instructor, can become more familiar with you as well as your classmates. So let's have a little fun and show off a little bit about ourselves that others may not necessarily see. And then when you get that page done, please post it to the blog in that section of the course. And when you get a chance, go back and take a look and see what other people have done as well. The next basic thing that I need you to do is to give you a little bit of information about yourself to me. So what I'd like for you to do very quickly within the next 72 hours is send me an email with the following information. Send me your name, a phone number that I can contact you at in case there's an emergency, and what your preferred email address is. And that would be the email address that I would mostly send and receive information from me to you and from you to me. And then include in that email just a brief statement, just a few sentences about what it is that you're currently doing in your career and what it is that you'd ultimately like to do with your MSW. Next, I'd like to talk about the syllabus. So in the syllabus, one of the first things that you'll find is the course description. And that basically says that this course prepares students to analyze mental health policies and services and their impact on client systems. Students examine factors underlying development of the current mental health system as a basis for developing strategies for policy change, as well as planning and implementing improved policies and services. The purpose of the course includes social workers need to be aware of the large and small-scale structures that formally and informally shape the context of their practice with persons experiencing mental health problems. Social work practice with this population of clients is challenging due to the complex, multi-layered set of laws, regulations, rules, and procedures that govern the actions of service organizations, their workers, and all professionals who come in contact with these clients. Additionally, attention needs to be paid to the variables of culture, ethnicity, gender, age, ability, economic status, sexual orientation, and religion and spirituality that influence the development and administration of policy. Students working in this area need knowledge of this service system and have the ability to critically analyze social policy, including issues of economic and social justice, to shape and influence family functioning across the lifespan. Students need to develop the skills to affect policies at the agency, local, regional, and state levels, acquiring techniques for collaboration and collective work. Course objectives include: recognize the impact of selected mental health social policies and programs and their consequences for people of all generations, for families in their diverse forms, and for local and regional communities. Promote social justice by understanding clients' legal rights, their rights to receive services to which they are entitled, and to participate as consumers in policy evaluation, development, and implementation. Analyze the effects on services of various philosophical approaches for provision of services for individuals characterized as having mental illness or behavior disorders. Recognize the old, new, and current state of mental health in California, the United States, and selected foreign countries, including demographic, historical, and social characteristics and conflicting views of the definition of mental health. Analyze significant county, state, and federal laws and regulations governing intervention with people with mental illness and behavior disorders across the lifespan, and operate ethically, responsibly, and with cultural competence under those authorities. Analyze selected judicial decisions that affect services to persons who have mental illness. The textbook for this course is Scheid's, A Handbook for the Study of Mental Health, Social Context, Theories, and Systems, from the Cambridge University Press. And some of the initial chapters that we will be reading are actually posted to this website so that you can have access to those in case the textbooks aren't available yet, as well as all of the other reading requirements beyond the one required text are all posted to the website. So let's talk about course expectations. Each time you open up a weekly unit, one of the items that you will see within that content area will be a table showing the weekly reading assignments. And in most instances, those reading assignments are actually posted right there to that table so that you can click on the link and see the material to read. It's just important that you read the assignments to the best of your ability. For that information that you find totally uninteresting, then you can scan that. But there's a little bit of everything in here, basically to give you an overview and introduction to various bureaucratic and administrative types of policies, activities, and models. And so the reading's usually relevant to the particular topic at hand, and so just try your best to keep up on the reading. There are 4 written assignments as well as a presentation that you will have to do, and all of those together, along with participation in it, make up the scoring for this particular class. So, for example, your participation in the class, as well as attending the 2 face-to-face sessions that we will have in April, all of that counts for 20 points of your total grade. The policy analysis paper topic is worth 5 points, the outline 10 points, the draft 15, and the final paper is 30, as well as the presentation that you will give on your topic is worth 20 points as well. So assignment number 1 is a policy analysis paper topic, and this is just really simple. It's just a 1-page document, double spaced. It's just basically introducing the topic that you're going to pick for analysis throughout this course. And so choose a social policy that's been legislated no less than 2 years ago, and the topic will be relevant to the purpose of the course. And we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail. As far as participation, in almost every weekly unit there will be a discussion board around current topics. So we'll throw out a current topic for that particular week, and I expect a little feedback around that topic. So, for example, if we're talking about medicinal marijuana, the policy issue may be how does local government implement safe access to medicinal marijuana when state law is in conflict with federal law for example. And so you would express your particular views on why you think that is or is not important. What do you think about the policy? What should be done about it? Who do you think's influencing it? Who do you think's opposed to it? That type of thing. So your participation, active participation in that discussion board in each of the weekly units is key, as well as your participation and presentation at the 2 face-to-face meetings, as well as just staying in regular communication with me. So don't hesitate to email me and let me know if you have a question or if you need additional information, if you're just simply confused or you want to express an alternate opinion. All of that counts towards how you're graded in this particular course. So let's talk about the major assignment for this course. And that is policy analysis. And there's a few things that make up that particular paper. So we'll break it out into basically 4 different components. And it's important to remember that between the presentation and the paper itself, that makes up a preponderance of your course. The paper and its components represent more than half the course score. So assignment 1 is coming right up, but it's real easy. It's no big deal. I just want you to have it completed in the 2nd weekly unit and no later than February 3rd or that weekend. It is graded. It's worth 5 points, and it's really important that when you pick a topic, don't pick something that's too recent where there's not going to be a lot of information available about it. So when I say the 2-year standard, what I mean by that is if you're going to write about legislation or a bill or something like that, make sure that it's been in place for at least 2 years. That way there's data out there about how it was implemented and what it's doing, if it's working or not working, who's implemented it, who's not implemented it, that kind of thing. So if you pick something that has some time around it, then you're more likely to have an easier time finding information. So remember that. You want to make this work easy for you, right? So, and then lastly, just to remember, no more than a page, and it's double spaced. So really what we're talking about here is just a few paragraphs, nothing big. So the paper topic basically is that you choose a social policy that's been legislated no less than 2 years ago, that it should be relevant to the purpose of the course, although you might have something that's really interesting that might go a little bit beyond the bounds of the course, and that's fine. Just communicate to me and ask me and let me know what's going on. And then in this 1-page paper, just explain your topic. What is it? Include with that a statement of the reasons why the policy is important for analysis. Why did you choose it? What difference has it made, do you think? Why do you think it was ultimately important that it be done? What was it trying to change or affect? And then think about, who would have supported this and who was opposed to it. What do you think those folks are? I mean, are they organizations, individual people, populations? Who are they, what are they, and why do you think they are a supporter or a detractor? And then, and what's the potential of this policy? Is it really have a huge impact on various systems, services, and the people within it? Was it a local impact, a state impact, a national impact, an international impact? Just basically try to describe to me why this particular topic that you're picking is important, why it's relevant, who supported or opposed it, and why do you think it had an impact on a system or a population. So chapter 21 in SHIDE, the handbook, the only textbook that you actually have to acquire for this class, in chapter 1 he begins to talk about the components that make up the mental health system. So think of the mental health system as a series of boxes and lines, and if we were to identify the 4 major components of the mental health system according to SHIDE, they would include private practice, public systems, hospitals, and corrections. And so first we've got this idea of private versus public. And the balance between services that are provided publicly and privately, Scheid argues that those are directly influenced by political climate, economic priorities, and the types of services themselves. Because based on politics and money, services may or may not be provided within a public system and only available through a private system. And private systems are ultimately, identified as out-of-pocket insurance, private insurance, group insurance, the type of things that we might get through our employer or our spouse's employer, that type of thing. Or we might buy private insurance. You just think about insurance basic medical insurance that you buy for yourself. And in many instances, obviously the insurance companies are banking on the fact that not everybody's going to access the services or access them at a very significant rate, so they're able to produce revenue as a result of that. We kind of call that the worried well phenomenon, in that people ultimately are healthy but constantly worried that something may happen to them, and they want to be prepared for that. And and that's in direct contrast to when you think about the chronically mentally ill or the severely mentally ill. I mean, when you think about that particular population, I mean, what real percentage of that population of chronically and severely mentally ill folks are covered by private out-of-pocket insurance? And in most instances, the answer to that is a big fat no. People don't really have that type of coverage. Catastrophic coverage is very difficult to come by. Even long-term healthcare coverage itself has significant limitations for pre-existing conditions that might limit people's access to that type of care. So in those instances, that's where your public service, the service occurring in the public sector, a public community mental health center, that type of thing, a county department of behavioral health, even the Veterans Administration. When you think about these various organizations, they're providing services to a population that most likely isn't going to be able to get much of that type of service in the private sector. And there's programs at all three levels of government, the federal, state, and local level, that provide care for folks that may not otherwise qualify for other types of care. So when we think of these, these components that make up the mental health system, what shades of difference are there in how those services are delivered to different populations? So let's look at this from a perspective of system relationships and how various systems relate to one another and why they're related. So one of the things that Scheid talks about is he identifies a group of systems that all provide some type of mental health assistance or service. And so when you look at this slide here, you see the formal system, which is ultimately the organized systems of care that are readily available for folks that have both private or public insurance. And so prime examples of those include primary care and specialty mental health. And then Scheid identifies this lay system. When you think about it, for example, an individual who may be entering into long-term care may have a sibling that is the executor of their estate, for example. They may also be their payee. They may be the person responsible for their conservatorship. And they're going to manage the types of services that an individual is provided. They may encourage an individual to access a particular service, like a friend telling another friend that they need to call a suicide hotline, or perhaps a friend introducing an individual to Alcoholics Anonymous. So these are the various types of things that Scheid identifies as making up a lay system. And then there's the folk system, and the folk system is typically, the religious or alternative healing. So perhaps, for example, the family I grew up in was very religious. We actually had a priest that attended a number of family events. It wasn't uncommon for a priest to be at dinner at my family's house on Sunday, actively engaged with my parents in conversations about their family, their faith, the children, that type of thing. And clearly, that particular individual provided a significant amount of advice and assistance to my parents in how they handled their family, their relationships, that type of thing, and socialized with an individual that it didn't hurt to hang out with, right? But typically, there are various components, such as alternative forms of healing as well, that make up what Scheid identifies as the folk system. And then there's those, safety net services out there that capture individuals, harness them into a particular form of care, or provide them an ad hoc level of service in order to keep them from being gravely disabled. And obviously the systems that we operate in represent some of these. For example, just individual social workers, systems and services available through the schools, or police intervention and involvement like a 5150 and that type of thing. So when you think about the lay system, the folk system, and the human social service system, these ultimately become gateways to that formal system at the top of the listing. So let's think about these now in a graphic way. So we have these components that Scheid says that basically makes up a typical mental health system, and that includes private practice, it includes public managed care or specialty mental health or community mental health services. It includes hospitals, which includes an acute hospital such as a psychiatric hospital. It could be a local hospital like a county hospital or a private hospital. Or it could be a state hospital for individuals with severe mental illness that have criminal tendencies. And then there's a de facto system of care that exists within jails and prisons, because individuals are provided with that care, which has been a very relevant topic lately anyway in California. And some people would argue that courts and the Veterans Administration are also a component of the mental health system. The courts really aren't. They're more of there's no service per se that's provided directly by the court, but they may mandate or refer another organization to provide that service. But courts have significant authority that directly influences the provisions of services and who has access to those services, such as when a court determines an individual needs to be conserved, for example. And the Veterans Administration unto itself is a complete system of service provided to veterans of war. And then we impose those other items that Scheid mentions, which actually become entry and formal gateways to these other components that make up the mental health system. And so as graphically displayed, we see that here in this diagram. Access to care is a significant social issue, and we know that typically, and Scheid argues, that only a limited number of people ultimately receive the care that they need, and that's roughly a third of the people that really deserve or need treatment. We know that treatment is provided in different locations, right? Such as inpatient versus outpatient. Inpatient being someone who's actually hospitalized, that might end up being a state hospital, for example, or outpatient, which might be something as simple as med management, which is typically more of the insurance type of activity. Inpatient, while having insurance cover, the longer a person is in inpatient, the more likely the costs are going to be borne by the public rather than a private insurance company. So we also know that care, when we look at the provision of care to various populations, that there are some emerging trends around that. We do know that socioeconomic status directly affects care. For example, more people who are hospitalized have a tendency to have lower income levels, as well as lower income individuals are more likely to become involved with a police designated 5150. And and why would you think that would be? Obviously, the more resources that are available to an individual, the more alternatives that they're going to have to be able to respond to their particular situation. The less resources they have available, the less likely they're able to handle that on their own, and then they become involved with the public system. We also know that females are more likely than men to become directly involved with the system, and one of the arguments or pieces of evidence around that is just that women are more likely to recognize their particular mental health needs sooner and respond more timely. And we also know that race and ethnicity impact that gap between those who really need treatment and those who don't receive it. In other words, minority races and ethnicities are most likely to have a need that's not met. And then if we look at folks that access mental health services and we were to draw a bell curve based on age, it would kind of look like a U, because the age of individuals most likely to engage mental health systems have a tendency to be young or older. And actually, it's just the opposite. It would be a true bell inverse curve, with individuals who are young and older having the lowest usage of mental health systems. Sorry about that. Which, by the way, is the opposite of physical health. Physical health would be the U-shaped curve, where younger individuals and older individuals are accessing the system more. So the Gilbert reading for this week talks about perspectives on the study of social policy. And Gilbert talks about the 3 P's of analysis, and the 3 P's are process, product, and performance. So, Gilbert basically argues that if you're going to analyze process, then you're focusing on the dynamics of policy formation with regard to socio-political and technical variables. And you try to understand the relationships and interactions among the political, governmental, and interest groups that are involved with that particular policy. And it might actually be a study of systems or systems of programs, because you're looking at process. And we're going to talk a little bit about that later in the course, and I've got a graphic depiction of that, and it'll make it a little bit easier to understand. So then analysis of the product would be the product of a planning process as a set of policy choices. Choices can be programs, laws, statutes, or plans that will eventually become programs. Studies are on the issues of the choices. What are the values, theories, and assumptions of those choices? And then the analysis of performance, description and evaluation of program outcomes, how well it was carried out, and what was the impact. So when we think about how we can analyze social policy, Gilbert gives us 3 basic areas that we could potentially look at. And we could look at why something came to be, or how that particular policy is implemented. So that's more process related, right? Or we might actually look at the individual product itself, such as a legislative analysis, where we're actually looking at why did a legislature or a member of Congress introduce a bill. What was it that they were trying to address? What was it they were trying to accomplish? And do any of their political values as a politician directly influence the reasons why they're introducing that particular piece of legislation, or how they're introducing that particular piece of legislation? And then the critical piece in this particular course is to also be able to pick a policy to analyze that's been around a little while, so there's data available at how effective that particular policy has been, and so that would be an analysis of the performance. So what's the political perspective of policy? And in this instance, Gilbert begins to talk about individual versus community values. And so when we think about policy implementation, even when we think about the creation of policy and we think about it from a political perspective, I mean, the most common one for us typically as Americans today is, we deal with something that's a Democrat supported policy, or one that's a Republican supported policy, or maybe it's a Tea Party supported policy. But we have a tendency to think about policy formation from a political party approach or a political party context, or in this instance, as Gilbert would argue, as a political perspective. And so obviously one political party is going to be more interested in the individual, the pursuit of individual interests, the traditional American dream or the laissez-faire approach, where government is small and doesn't get too much involved with the individual. People are free to do what they need to do in order to be successful in life, and government is essentially out of the way. And then there's this other opposite end of the spectrum where Gilbert identifies it as the community value perspective, in that it's a common action on behalf of common goals, that there's a fair share correction to social economic malfunction and a protection of interests of all against the agenda of the few. And so this is where government begins to get involved, because we might, for example, the very basic tenets of the formation of government, even in an area where there's not a organized form of government such as a city council, there would still most likely be a community services district in which people have gotten together to pull their money together to be able to operate a common community well and keep that well operated and maintained. So they organize around that particular need that needs to be done. Or, for example, maybe the policy has more to do with what Gilbert referred to as fair share, in that because of a societal factor. Just the fact of what we mentioned earlier about socioeconomic status directly affecting the ability of an individual to access ongoing mental health services. And one of the reasons why we provide mental health services in the community from a public community health system is because individuals aren't able to insure themselves or carry insurance that provides an adequate mental health benefit, or they become severely mentally ill and aren't insurable. And so part of the reason for creating a public mental health system is to make sure that there's addressing an equity issue around people's access to care. And then furthermore, there might be, continuing that particular example, you might have a group of people that are receiving care, and it turns out, for example, that they're undocumented, and the common political feeling at that particular moment in time is that undocumented individuals shouldn't have access to public services. So they have if they had a tendency to not to have access to private insurance, and they didn't have access to public care as well, then they would have no care, which would result in difficulties at the local level for communities, for police departments, for the public, and ultimately an individual who could live a higher quality of life isn't able to do that because there's nothing available to them.
So here's an example of how values are applied to policy.
Know that there's something wrong in this country when gays can serve openly in the military, but our kids can't openly celebrate Christmas or pray in school. As president, I'll end Obama's war on religion, and I'll fight against liberal attacks on our religious heritage. Faith made America strong. It can make her strong again. I'm Rick Perry, and I approve this message.
So why is policy analysis relevant to us? And Gilbert makes a lot of arguments as to why it's relevant, and you can see here on the slide a number of things that Gilbert identifies as being important. And so the first one there is the social worker can play an important role in the development and execution of social policy. I mean, most policy implemented today around mental health is going to directly impact the local practitioner in one way or another. And as an individual who's responsible for delivering that service, you as the individual doing that are more likely to understand how well it works and the impact that it has on the individuals it was intended to help. So therefore, what you see and what you learn in the implementation of policy within your career is critical to how that policy is implemented and developed. So you have a direct impact on that as a social worker. The other is the ability to interpret policy. I mean, it's critical in the work that we do and to be able to serve the individuals who come to us and seek services. In order to be able to serve them better, we need to be able to interpret policy change as it's occurring, being prepared to make the changes necessary in order to be able to not only provide the service well to the individual, but get them the access they need and be able to know how to address that in a time of change. Now, policy formation is a little bit different than all of the other social worker functions, and so that's one of the reasons why we're spending more time talking about things that have more to do with political science and public administration than they actually have to do with social work, because we need to be able to comprehend those fields of practice in order to be able to better understand how to influence the formation and implementation of policy. And of course, how policy is created and made is going to have a direct impact on the services that we provide as social workers. Now, policy structures the nature of social work practice at the service delivery level. So, for example, deinstitutionalization reduced the need for in-hospital social services and expand the demand for community-based services, such as when Ronald Reagan reduced the number of spots or slots in state hospitals and returned individuals to their community. Obviously, then there was a higher demand for community-based services to meet the needs of that population now that they were no longer hospitalized. And social workers must now do more than just direct counseling. They have to weave together housing, health, income support, social service programs on behalf of their clients. I mean, even when you think about the implementation of the Mental Health Services Act, ultimately for individuals who fall into the full service partnerships, you know, the Act specifically states, you know, whatever it takes, and the skill set, the knowledge that we have available to us as social workers, the more tools that we have available to us, the better we're able to accommodate the needs of our clients, especially from a client perspective, in a way that makes sense, is meaningful, is holistic, and not disjointed and difficult for the person to actually access and utilize. So once we are good at policy analysis, and at least we understand what it is and know enough about how to do it, we're going to be more effective as social workers. It's also really important to recognize that you may be called upon to explain a particular issue or to present the impact of a particular policy on you as a social worker. I mean, me as a mental health director, as a county mental health director, I probably spend, roughly probably about 3% of my time, maybe 5% of my time directly interacting with major decision makers. Actually, I was really thinking about the state is probably 3% of my time, but when I think about the county board of supervisors, I mean, roughly probably 15% of my total time as a county mental health director is directly involved with influencing the decision makers at the local, state, and sometimes federal level. I'm actually providing them direct advice about a need that requires a piece of legislation or a bill or a piece of legislation that's been introduced, how that's going to impact what it is that we do in the public mental health system. And is that a good thing, or should the legislation or bill be changed so that it ends up to be a better policy if it's adopted and implemented? And then, the one thing that I think is critically important is the opportunity to advance in your career from a service provider to a planner, a manager, or a researcher. And I think, it's just critical for you to understand in this class that by better understanding policy analysis and coming to grips with the political information that I'm going to be providing to you, the analysis and an insider's understanding of politics, your ability to actually use that in order to be able to advance your career. Because a lot of what I am going to talk to you about in this particular course is really a management level type of discussion. And I'm going to talk about budgets and finances and policy choices and systems systems integration and systems transformation. I mean, we're talking about high-level organizational theory and activities that ultimately are skill sets that are important to individuals that find themselves in management and administration. So in this course, I'm going to give you the basic tools at a minimum to be able to understand why management does what it does, so that you can interact with that both in a positive or perhaps in a negative feedback way, but at least you have the skill set to do that, because it will have a better outcome in the end, or even some of the basic skills for you to actually operate at that level in the organization. So to summarize, in weekly unit number 1, we talked about basic course information that will help you be more successful in this course. We gave a basic introduction to systems, what they are, their components. We talked a little bit about how systems are related to one another, both internally and externally, and the gateways and referrals into those systems. We talked a little bit about the basics of social policy analysis, and we talked about the relevance of policy analysis to our careers. So remember, complete the weekly units on a weekly basis. They're designed for you to complete over a week. Take some time right away to go to Glockster.com and create your introduction page and post a link to that introduction page back to the blog in this section so that I can see it. Remember to pick a topic for your policy analysis. This is assignment number 1. You need to turn that in to me when you start weekly unit number 2 no later than February